Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
you're going to be safer and you're going to get there faster.
The president signs the infrastructure bill into law, one-on-one with Mayor Lightfoot on what it could mean for Chicago.
This is a generational investment.
And a look at what that $1 trillion investment could mean for projects all across Illinois.
The power dynamic is shifting to the workers.
A record number of Americans are quitting their jobs. What's behind the so-called Great Resignation, and what does it mean for the future of work?
Gun violence is devastating communities, neighborhoods, blocks, and families.
A new office in Illinois aims to reduce gun violence in communities most impacted.
As union contract negotiations wrap at John Deere, the used tractor business sees a boom. That and more from Cranes.
The EPA announces a national recycling strategy. Meet two local scientists working to make recycling a profit-making proposition.
Resilience, we are strong.
Plus, the Chicago Children's Choir on their 65 years of history and music making and its latest collaboration. But first, some of today's top stories. The controversial leader of Chicago's police union says he plans to quit the force tomorrow. John Catanzara's announcement comes after a day of testifying at his own termination hearing before the Chicago Police Board. Catanzara called the hearing a, quote, farce and announced his retirement as an officer, saying, quote, I will no longer be a Chicago police officer. No one will be able to touch me, not you, not this police board. Catanzara, who was elected last year as head of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7, has been accused of violating a number of CPD rules stemming from his inflammatory social media activity and for filing false police reports against a supervisor and former Superintendent Eddie Johnson. Catanzara intends to remain on as FOP president. The jury in the Kyle Rittenhouse murder trial is one step closer to getting the case. The jury heard closing arguments from prosecutors and Rittenhouse's defense attorneys today, and the judge ruled that the jury can consider lesser charges in their deliberations and dismissed a misdemeanor gun possession charge. The Antioch native shot and killed 2 men and wounded a third during protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 2020. Prosecutors called Rittenhouse a wannabe soldier, quote unquote, while his defense attorneys say he acted in self-defense.
The defendant decided to pull the trigger on his AR-15 4 times. That was his decision. And he is responsible for every bullet that comes out of that gun. He doesn't get a pass by pulling the trigger fast.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle was not an active shooter. That is a buzzword that the state wants to lash onto because it excuses the actions of that mob.
If convicted of the most serious charge, Rittenhouse could face a mandatory life sentence. Jury deliberations are set to begin tomorrow. And Chicago tops 700 homicides for the year. The Chicago Police Department says 715 people have died as a result of Chicago's violence, with just more than 6 weeks until the end of the year. 2 people were killed and 6 others shot today alone. That's in addition to 21 people shot, 4 of them fatally, over the weekend. Shootings are up 9% since last year, and homicides are up 3%. And up next, President Biden signs his signature infrastructure bill into law. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Up to $17 billion is set to come Illinois' way with a federal infrastructure law now in place. Amanda Vinicky begins our coverage with a breakdown of what that means for the region. Amanda.
Paris, it has been a while since the U.S. has invested in its infrastructure in a comprehensive fashion. Shovel-ready projects were funded during President Barack Obama's first term, but it wasn't as large as this is. And while President Donald Trump said he wanted to pass an infrastructure package, that never happened. But after a whole lot of negotiating, and now today with the stroke of a pen, money will soon be flowing toward roads, the electric grid, water systems, having lead pipes removed. In the intervening period, the United States came to rank 13th in quality of overall infrastructure, according to the World Economic Forum.
Well, that's about to change. Things are going to turn around in a big way. For example, because of this law, next year will be the first year in 20 years American infrastructure investment will grow faster than China's. We'll once again have the best roads, bridges, ports, and airports.
Head of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Illinois, Kevin Ardle, calls it a generational investment.
We know in Illinois, we've got projects that we need to fix right now, right? We see potholes on roads and we've got repairs to make on our expressways and such, but much larger than that, this makes investments in projects that we don't even see yet. I mean, it sets us up for projects like repairing the 270 corridor in Madison, or repairing the Eisenhower Expressway, redoing the Blue Line at the CTA, reconfiguring Lakeshore Drive. And those are projects that are still in the design phase. So when we talk about generational investments, those are projects that are going to be in design for years and then construction for years. So it's really a long-term investment in preparing our region's infrastructure for the challenges of the future.
Well, if you drive around at all, though, you'll notice there's already a lot of construction going on, and that is in part due to Illinois' own bipartisan $45 billion infrastructure plan, Rebuild Illinois, passed in 2019 and paid through in part through a higher tax on gasoline. Chicago, DuPage, Will counties likewise have passed their own smaller infrastructure plans.
Rebuild Illinois put us on a position to repair our infrastructure. I think what happens now with the national bill and the funding coming from that puts us in a position to expand our corridors and modernize our infrastructure. And that is exactly the 1-2 punch that our state needed.
Now, where exactly is all of this money going to go? The feds parse that out some, allocating really blocks of money for certain types of needs. Of the $1.25 trillion the feds will be spending on infrastructure, Illinois is set to receive about $17 billion, with $9.8 billion going toward federal highway projects, $1.4 billion for bridge replacement and repairs. The state has more than 2,000 bridges that have been graded as poor condition. $4 billion going toward public transportation throughout Illinois, $1.7 billion for drinking water and water infrastructure, and then there's still more for things like climate change, broadband internet access, and airport improvements.
We have a really big opportunity to make investments in our region that we haven't been able to before. We know that our system needs maintenance, modernization. We are the hub of freight movements for the country here, and there are some really huge investments that this bill will allow us to make here in Northeastern Illinois.
And now, how exactly is it decided where exactly that money is going to be spent? Well, each year the Illinois Department of Transportation, that is, updates its 5-year plan, and then it's up to IDOT how to spend the bulk of the money. Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, Aaron Alleman, says priority projects include bridges over I-80, that Eisenhower Expressway corridor, also a public-private partnership to untangle freight and passenger rail. Also, part of the infrastructure law, a focus on making public transit stations accessible.
There is a specific program that Senator Duckworth sponsored that got incorporated into this. You know, when you think about how accessible our transit system is here in the city of Chicago, there are many stations that you just don't have elevators, right, that only have stairs. And so thinking about how we create a more inclusive and thriving region, you know, that's one of the ways that we can get people to jobs and economic opportunity. And there is funding for that here.
$17 billion slated for Illinois, but the state could actually grab more. The feds have money set aside for needs that governments can compete to win. And the Council of Engineers, Ardle, says Illinois is best positioned to bring that home, both because of the state's needs, also because that rebuild program means that there's money in the bank intended for infrastructure purposes. So Illinois should have the money to be able to put up matching funds when that's required by the feds. Still, he warns, as does CMAP's Alleman, that all of that money, not quite enough to take care of all of Illinois' backlog of needs. By the way, before signing the bill, President Joe Biden thanked all of the mayors and governors, bipartisan, he says, who'd lobbied to help to get that passed. And in the audience for that, among them, well, Chicago's own Mayor Lightfoot and Illinois' Governor J.B. Pritzker. Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. And now we're joined by Mayor Lori Lightfoot from Washington, D.C. The mayor attended today's bill signing ceremony in the White House Rose Garden. Mayor Lightfoot, thank you so much for joining us. First, take us behind the scenes at today's event. What happened?
Well, it was a great event. As you know, because of the pandemic, these kind of gatherings have been few and far between. And for the mayors that were there, it's the first time that we've been together since January, February of 2020, before all the pandemic-induced shutdowns happened. We've seen each other on Zooms, we've talked to each other on the phone, but it was really terrific to be able to be there in person. And for me, it was also great to be able to see many of the cabinet members, Secretary Buttigieg, Secretary Walsh, and then I had a few minutes at the end of the ceremony with Mitch Landrieu, who apparently is going to be the infrastructure czar. But it was really great to be able to see folks and talk about and make the case for why these resources are going to be so incredibly important and transformative to Chicago. Got to spend a brief moment with the vice president, which was probably the highlight of my day. But it was really inspiring to be part of such an historic event.
And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of resources coming to Chicago and Illinois in this bill. You talked about the CTA and Red Line extension to 130th. The wheels have been in motion on this for a bit. Is this project now officially a go because of this infrastructure bill?
Well, I think so. You know, we obviously have to wait and see exactly what parts of the package are going to be pure grants versus competitive grants. But the CTA is well positioned. Whichever funding stream comes to be able to take advantage of this. I have to give hats off to our various members of Congress, particularly our senior senator, Dick Durbin, Senator Duckworth, Representative Quigley, Kelly, and Kristen Morte. They've all been incredibly helpful and instrumental in making sure that we got the resources that we needed. And they were listening to what was going to be important to Chicago. Lead service lines, obviously, is another important aspect of this bill, along with the monies to build up the electric car infrastructure. Broadband is going to help the city. So there's a lot of different nooks and crannies of this bill that are going to be incredibly beneficial to Chicagoans.
Right, and speaking of that lead service line replacement for water, is $1.7 billion slated for Illinois for that project. Will there be enough money here to cover the entire cost of replacing Chicago's lead service lines? And how long is this whole project going to take now?
Well, look, it's not going to cover everything. Keep in mind that we've got the largest lead service line collection in this country, but it's going to certainly help enormously. And we're going to push to make sure that we get our fair share of those dollars from Springfield. But it's going to be enormously helpful to the work that we've already started in Chicago with the passage of last year's capital plan.
And speaking of water, I'm sure you saw that WBEZ investigation showing that Chicagoans have racked up collective $420 million in debt trying to pay off water bills or late fees for water bills. Does the city need to take a less punitive approach to fees and fines, especially considering that this report found it was impacting black communities the most?
Well, look, we knew that this was a huge issue. Before I even got sworn in during the transition, I directed the water department to stop shutting up people off from water, because I believe that water is a basic human right. In addition to that, we stood up a utility billing relief program that began in early 2020, and we just encourage people to sign up for it. We put together a customized billing plan, and after a year of consistent payment, all your old water debt is wiped away. This is a great plan, a great program. Go to the city's website, check out the water department and the Department of Finance. We want to get more people signed up so that we can get people back into service and wash away that old debt.
All right, I want to get back to some of the infrastructure highlights. You were proposing all-electric bus fleet for the CTA. Is there money in here to complete a project like that, and how long would that take?
Well, there is money to help us towards our goal of getting an all-electric fleet. There's also money to build up the electronic vehicle charging stations and the other infrastructure that's really going to be needed. Senator Durbin has really taken the lead on this for the state, and we want to make sure that we're part of the electric vehicle future. Not only is it great for the economy, but for the environment, but it'll also make sure that we've got good paying jobs and really encourage people to lower their carbon footprint by going to all electric vehicles.
Speaking of the environment, what about money for mitigation of climate change effects, flooding from the lake, flooding from heavy rain events, which Chicago seems to be seeing more and more of in recent years?
No, this is a significant issue, and there's a lot of money in this package for that as well. We've been pushing, as you know, to get the Army Corps of Engineers to continue the revetment work in the lake. The areas in our city, north and south, where the revetment work has happened, we're not seeing that kind of flooding. But we know that this is a significant challenge, and we're going to push the Army Corps of Engineers that now got millions and millions of more dollars than was initially projected to get that work done. But meanwhile, we're going to keep working with community to make sure that we're doing things to mitigate the effects of the rising lake levels and the flooding that ensues. But this is a significant step forward for us.
And Mayor, you're in Washington right now. I have to ask you about some of the breaking news of today. The FOP president, John Catanzara, he had been facing termination hearings for his job at CPD. Instead, he announces he plans on retiring rather than face being fired. Your reaction to that?
Well, it's not surprising to me at all that John Catanzara saw the writing on the wall. He has disgraced himself and disgraced the department. And I think that there was a very strong case that was going to be made against him. So it's not surprising to me that he didn't want to face accountability for his own conduct. But really, we've got to be about the future. And John Catanzara is very much a part of the past. I want to make sure that our officers, particularly those young officers, are the best trained and best protected and best supported for our police department in the country. That's what we have to be about, not somebody who's ruined his own career. I don't want to see him lead any more officers astray with his bombastic and offensive rhetoric. We've got to move forward and away from John Catanzara to the future of our department, which to me looks great. We've got a lot of work that we need to continue doing along police reform and accountability, but our officers are doing heroic work every single day, and we've got to make sure that we're fully supporting them.
Mayor, on another subject, your office has a deadline this week to respond to an IG report on the aftermath of the botched CPD raid of Anjanette Young, including actions taken by your office and some of the legal settlement talks. Do you commit to releasing that report publicly?
Well, I don't think that report is complete. And I sent a letter to the IG late last week telling them that they needed to account for their own conduct. As you may remember, the former IG in July of 19 indicated that he was going to do a full investigation of these so-called wrong raid cases, including the one involving Anjanette Young, and yet we never heard from them. And the report that came out did not hold the IG itself accountable for the fact that they had this case for almost a year and a half and did nothing. So I think in order for us to understand what happened for all of city government and to make sure that the investigation is complete, it's really important for the IG to account for its own work or lack thereof in connection with Anjanette Young and the other cases. So this investigation is not complete, and I've asked the IG to finish its work as quickly as possible, and then the city departments in the mayor's office will respond.
Well, his contention, the former IG's contention, was that he could not get the information he needed because...
That's just not true. That's just not true. That's absolutely not true.
Okay, Mayor,
not only every city department, including the mayor's office and myself personally, cooperated in the investigation. There was plenty of opportunity for the IG to do what's necessary. I don't know what happened, but I think we have to have some specific answers around why it was that they took on this responsibility in July of 19, and we didn't hear a peep from them for a year and a half until that video became public.
Mayor, I know
that to me has to be addressed.
I know you're about to catch a flight back to Chicago. I just want to ask you about REMAP. This is my last question. You know that the Black Caucus wants to keep 18 majority African American wards. The Hispanic caucus is asking for 16 majority Latino wards. Are you going to support a map that has 18 majority African American wards?
Look, compromise is the art of our democracy. I think the president said that loud and clear today. And so members of the city council are going to have to compromise. But first and foremost, there's got to be transparency. So members of the public, particularly those areas in the city that have been carved up between 3, 4, and in some instances, 5 different wards, they've got to have an opportunity to weigh in and see a map that really reflects the lived experience of people in the city. So I'm looking forward to some transparency around the remap process, and we'll see what the city council does, but the public has to have an opportunity to weigh in. And I'm very mindful of the fact that the clock is ticking, and I've been following this, but we need to see a lot more transparency and real accountability to the residents of the city. We've got to live with these wards for a decade, and we've got to make sure that we correct some problems from the last couple cycles where too many of our neighborhoods were carved up and residents felt like they didn't know who to go to get answers to basic city services and questions.
I'm sorry, Mayor, go ahead and finish.
I think it's really important that we make sure that the map is reflective of what we're hearing from residents, and that residents know who their alderman is, so that they know who to hold accountable.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Mayor Lightfoot, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, and safe travels home.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And up next, a growing number of people are leaving the workforce. What's the cause behind the Great Resignation? Stay with us.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
American workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers. Government data shows a high of 4.4 million people left their jobs in September. It's part of what's been dubbed the Great Resignation. Some say workers have spent the pandemic reevaluating their priorities and values, leading them to leave their places of work or demand more from their employers. Joining us to discuss the so-called Big Quit and what it means for the future of work are Hillary Phillips Mehta, Vice President of Employee Experience at the global communications firm Edelman, and Michelle Kahn, a social scientist who completed her doctoral work at the University of Chicago. She recently published an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune about the Great Resignation. Now, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, 3% of workers quit their jobs in September. The industries with the largest increase in departures were arts, entertainment, and recreation, other services like repair and maintenance or personal services, as well as state and local public education. Michelle Kahn, let's start with you, please. Why are workers quitting their jobs?
I think there's a whole lot of reasons for this, but the first thing I want to say is that this is not just people leaving their jobs because of falling back on pandemic relief. I think there's a really big question about worker burnout. During the pandemic, a lot of people went above and beyond to risk not only their mental health, but also their physical health, and they didn't get a whole lot in return. So I think that there's a real existential crisis going on in terms of what people want to be doing during their days, during their precious days that they have here on this planet. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. A lot of women have also had to exit the job market because there's a complete crisis of care work going on in this country at the moment. So I think that these are some of the biggest questions, but of course it depends on each and every individual, and every individual has a really fascinating story to tell about that moment where it all just became a little too much for them.
Now, earlier today, we spoke with Ashley South. In the spring, she left her job at a bank to start a magazine in Naperville. One reason, she says, is a difference in values. She says comments by a top executive at an employee appreciation meeting made this clear to her. Let's listen.
Telling this group of people who kept the lights on during the pandemic that he was impacted by not being able to go to the Alps for his annual vacation. And he didn't ask any questions. he just talked about how he was impacted.
Hillary Phillips Mehta, does this ring true to what you see employees looking for more broadly from their places of work?
So Edelman recently released the 2021 Trust Barometer special report on the belief-driven employee, which highlights how the employee-employer relationship has evolved throughout the pandemic and the new expectations of employees. And 76% now do have those higher expectations than they did a year ago. And what is motivating them to join and stay has shifted dramatically. So they're turning inward and reflecting very deeply on what they want to prioritize in their lives and at work. 6 in 10 are now choosing employers based on their values and beliefs. They're leaving jobs in record numbers, with compensation and benefits no longer being enough to incentivize them to join or stay. They're choosing based on flexibility, social responsibility, senior leadership, and the company's stance on, controversial issues over the company's success in the marketplace. There's a huge gap in these expectations and how employers are showing up. So that's when people are leaving. We found 1 in 5 have left or are planning to leave their jobs in the next 6 months in search of an employer that will meet their expectations.
So here's another one. Earlier today, we spoke with Fadi Haddad, a video editor who recently left his corporate job to do freelance work. Here's a clip about why he left.
Even though I was doing work that I loved, it was the corporate environment that made it, like I use the word leech as a soul sucking, because they would just try to get as much out of you as possible. So I don't think this is unique to me. I think this is across the board. Like, a lot of people just look for worker bees.
So Michelle, many people are pivoting to the gig economy, starting their own businesses. Why is that the trend? Why are we seeing that?
I think why that is the trend is, really because of this being fed up of the 9 to 5, the bosses, the exploitation. But I really want to focus on not why, but what is the actual consequence and what my concerns are about that. So it's actually a very significant trend. The recent numbers are quite startling, showing that there's been a record number of people registering for new businesses just in the last few months. And a lot of people are celebrating this, but if you actually break it down, a lot of different kinds of categories of work fall into that. So you have people who are, opting for startups, but freelancing, contract work, but also people who are joining the gig economy. But for me and my work, what I really want to point out is that freedom always entails risk. It can be a double-edged sword. We've seen this with the gig economy. It was very alluring at first, where people thought that they no longer had to sort of, sell their souls for someone else, but could work for themselves, be entrepreneurs, get up and start their own businesses. But over time, their wages have been diminished because of of the fact that they have been sort of pushed into more and more precarious kinds of work. And some of them are not even being able to sort of make ends meet, even though they're working more than ever. So the big question is, what kind of safety nets are out there for people who are leaving the sort of safety and protection of traditional jobs? And it will be much more dangerous for some people than it will be for others.
And because it comes at the risk of losing some benefits that those traditional 9 to 5 jobs might have. Hillary, what can employers do to retain workers?
It starts with having a shared understanding of the company's employee experience at large, or what it means to join and work at the company through what we call an employee value proposition, or EVP. This is a crisp articulation of what employees can expect at work in exchange for their productivity and performance. And that extends far beyond the compensation and benefits, but it really outlines the beliefs of how a company does business, their brand image, and more. So many companies are reevaluating that EVP right now, because today's employees are expecting a powerful employer brand that aligns with what they're seeking most. So we like to think about it as taking a consumer-grade marketing and measurement approach to recruitment and retention. Companies have to brand their organizations and their employee experience to ultimately strengthen their culture in this new environment and position themselves for future growth.
And Michelle, we're almost out of time, but I want to be sure to ask, how does this connect to how the U.S. thinks of productivity and the role of work in people's lives?
Yeah, I think that this is, for me, is one of the most important questions. As a historical sociologist, I sort of think about, the long term, where it comes from, that why do we value work so much? Why are we so addicted to this as being the primary way that we think of ourselves as human beings or deserving of freedom in any kind of way? And how can we break free of this?
Michelle Khan and Hillary Phillips Mehta, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, some companies predict online shopping, particularly snack shopping, is here to stay. That and more from Cranes.
Gun violence is devastating communities, neighborhoods, blocks, and families.
A new office that's part of the reimagined Public Safety Act will focus on reducing gun violence in Illinois. On the day the EPA announces a national recycling strategy, we talk with two local scientists aiming to make recycling batteries and plastic a money-making proposition.
Resilience, we are strong.
And the Chicago Children's Choir on 65 years of history and music making. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Chicago Police Union's controversial president says he plans to retire from the police force tomorrow, this after an acrimonious testimony at his own termination hearing. John Catanzara's announcement comes after testifying before the Chicago Police Board. He's accused of violating CPD rules stemming from his social media activity and filing false police reports. Catanzara was unapologetic on the witness stand, calling the hearing a, quote, farce, and he announced his retirement from the department soon after. He said, quote, I will no longer be a Chicago police officer. No one will be able to touch me, not you, not this police board. Catanzara was elected last year as head of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 7, and has 2 more years left in his 3-year term as head of that union. Catanzara says he intends to remain on in that role. The jury in the Kyle Rittenhouse murder trial is one step closer to getting the case. The jury heard closing arguments from prosecutors and the Antioch natives' defense attorneys today. Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 men and wounded a third with an AR-15 style rifle during protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 2020. Prosecutors called Rittenhouse a, quote, wannabe soldier, while his defense attorney says that he acted in self-defense. The judge ruled that the jury can consider lesser charges in their deliberations and dismissed a misdemeanor gun possession charge today. Rittenhouse could get a life sentence if convicted on the most serious charges against him. Jury deliberations are set to begin tomorrow. Chicago tops New York in one dubious category, rat complaints. Chicagoans have called in complaints about rodents more than twice as much as New Yorkers so far this year. The study conducted by Rent Hop showed Chicago 311 has received more than 60,000 rodent complaints so far this year. In New York, rodent complaints totaled more than 25,000 across its 5 boroughs, but that's up nearly 29% from last year. And New York's population is more than 3 times the size of Chicago's. So one question remains, are there really more rats in Chicago, or just more people here willing to rat them out to local officials? Ponder that one. And now to Brandis and some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. As union contract negotiations at John Deere could soon come to an end, the used tractor business is booming. A new CEO for Six Flags, and it appears staying in and snacking is more than just something many of us did this past year. It's a trend that could last well beyond the pandemic. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Hello again, Ann. So, the United Auto Workers at Deere & Company, who began striking 4 weeks ago, are set to vote on a contract. What does this promise?
Well, this is the 3rd deal to go before the UAW rank and file, Brandis. And to tell you the truth, I was surprised they didn't take the second one, because that one contained a 10% pay raise, significantly more than the deal that was originally on the table, as well as a host of other sweeteners. Now, the company said that last offer was its final one. And I suppose nothing's ever really final until the ink is dry. And sure enough, the union membership is now being asked to consider a very similar proposal with only modest modifications. So it likely still contains provisions like an $8,500 bonus for every employee, as well as a promise of 5% pay raises in 2023 and 2025. We don't have all the details of the contract yet, but we'll know a lot more after the union rank and file votes on Wednesday.
Okay, and so before we move on, the used tractor business, though, it's become a crucial marketplace during this strike. How's that?
We've been told that farmers who need to get their hands on equipment to pull in their harvest are flooding auctions throughout the Midwest. And they're setting record-setting prices as they do so, bidding up prices on everything from tractors to irrigation equipment. It's just, with the deer strike, plus the other well-documented supply chain problems that the entire economy seems to be experiencing, farmers, like everybody else, are finding that they have to scrap to get the materials they need.
Okay, and we know that Six Flags has a new CEO. What can you tell us about him?
His name is Salim Basul, and he's well known in suburban business circles around here because he led the restaurant equipment maker Middleby Corp out in Elgin for many, many years. Now he's stepping into the top job at Six Flags at a time when the company is really reeling from the pandemic and seeking a path back to growth. So it'll be really interesting to watch how Basul does in this entirely different setting.
Okay, and real quick, Ann, before we let you go, Chicago-based Mondelez says the company sees online snack buying lasting beyond the pandemic. Is that correct? Is the company right?
I know I'm likely to keep on snacking. I don't know about you, Brandis, but the company does expect that now that people are so used to buying their snacks online, that this trend is likely to continue post-pandemic. We'll just have to wait and see if it's right.
There's always time for more snacks.
That's right.
Ann Dwyer at Cranes, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brandis.
Governor J.B. Pritzker recently declared gun violence a public health crisis in Illinois and pledged $250 million to support community-based organizations tackling the issue. The plan is part of Pritzker's Reimagined Public Safety Act, which created a new Office of Firearm Violence Prevention to focus on communities with the highest rates of gun activity. The new office will be led by Chris Patterson, who has worked in grassroots organizations trying to mitigate the effects of gun violence for more than a decade. And he joins us now. Chris Patterson is the Assistant Secretary of Firearm Violence Prevention for the Illinois Department of Human Services. Chris, welcome to Chicago tonight. Congrats on your new role that you've taken on. How does your experience, previously working to combat gun violence in Chicago, prepare you for this new job? Chris, I think you're on mute. There you are.
Yep. So thank you for having me, and good evening. For the last 11 years, I've worked in the violence reduction space. I worked as a community organizer, seeing the root cause and a lot of heart and pain throughout the years, right? A lot of blood, a lot of families hurting. And to see it, to be energized by the governors and the Illinois General Assembly's move to create a new program and a new outlet that allows people to reimagine what public safety could look like. So I'm excited. I feel like today is a new day for a lot of people in Illinois.
I'm sure. So as we mentioned, Governor Pritzker has pledged $250 million for communities that are most affected by gun violence. How can this money be spent on reducing gun violence?
I think there's a lot of great work going on in the street that goes unnoticed. So our mission in this office is to be laser focused, work with our partners across the state of Illinois, ICEJA, and then in Chicago to work on addressing the violence that's going on in the communities. What we would like to do is empower, train, and support those organizations that are doing some of that grassroots work now.
And we hear a lot, of course, about, community disinvestment and how that lends itself to the gun violence that we see. What kind of investments could these funds make? You say partnering with, it sounds like organizations on the ground.
What I think is really bold and innovative from the governor's office is this idea that not only are we going to look out and support the organizations and programs from a database-driven standpoint, but we're also going to think about how do we affect the long-term strategy, right? And so that's affecting people's mental health, supporting them, in a structural dynamics, right? Making sure people have jobs and employment opportunities, opportunities to go back to school, right? So a lot of people who live within the state, particularly those in Chicago and in other parts of the state, they wake up in the morning and think about potentially being shot or being harmed, right? We want that that not to be the reality of people who live in Illinois.
So according to recent data from the Chicago Police Department, there have been 715 homicides so far this year. Now that is compared to 696 homicides in all of last year. Chris, what do you believe, to what do we credit this surge in violence that we've been experiencing this year?
Yeah, so from 2016 to 2019, we saw a huge reduction in shootings in the area of Chicago, if you would, as an example. And that was led by grassroots organizations, law enforcement, community organizations working together to bring solutions to inequities, right? And so when COVID happened to us, I think it exposed the underbelly of inequities and showed that, we in fact had a lot of work to do when it came to making sure people's lives were balanced and fair, right? And so I think a lot of what we're going to be doing with the Reimagine Public Safety Act is bringing that equity, bringing that fairness back to people's lives.
What are your first steps in implementing this act with regards to, reaching out to local partners?
Our first part is with our partners at the Illinois General Assembly, working with those identifying organizations, community members who are doing this great work across the state. We're partnered with, our community-led organizations who are doing this work on the grassroots level. And so what we're going to do is listen. We're going to go around and listen to what has been working right? What would they like to increase? What has statistically shown to work in their communities, and we're going to support that. We want to make sure that we're listening to the communities downstate, southern and northern part of Illinois to support their vision of what they feel safer communities are.
Do you think, could the funding also lend itself towards innovation in some of those organizations trying something that hadn't previously been tried?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're going to lead with supporting people in the mental health categories, right? So a lot of hurt people, right? And this idea that, only incarcerating people or only, taking care of people when they need the help. Like, we're going to go out there and empower street outreach organizations to go out and find individuals, connect them to the mental health support that they may need, to the resources they need in order to feel like they can live a life worthy of not being trapped in that cycle of violence, right? So there's a lot of innovative ideas coming out, and we're excited, to be part of that.
Okay. Combating gun violence is obviously a heavy lift for anybody who's working to do it. Chris Patterson, thank you for joining us, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Up next, a deep dive into the cutting edge of recycling. But first, a look at the weather.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Today's officially America Recycles Day, but the reality is that America doesn't recycle all that much, reusing only around a third of all the trash it creates. This has prompted the EPA to announce a national recycling strategy. Here in Chicago, most independent reviews have found that the city's blue bin efforts have fallen well short. And joining us now are two scientists from Argonne National Laboratory at the forefront of research on recycling. They are Max Del Ferro. He's a chemist and a leader of the Catalysis Science Program at Argonne that aims to develop upcycling to turn plastic waste into more useful commodities. And Jeff Spangenberger, who is leading Argonne's efforts to develop environmentally sustainable and cost-effective ways of recycling lithium-ion batteries. And those power everything from electric vehicles to cell phones and laptops. So welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. I'll start with you, Massimiliano. We all know what recycling is, but when it comes to plastic, explain what upcycling means.
Yeah. Hey, Paul. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, really upcycling is really the next step that we need to take to really, if we really want to do an efficient recycling of plastics. So far, we only recycle 2 of the plastics that are on the market, the PET, the plastic bottle, and the milk jug of the HDPE of the milk jug. And what we want to do from a scientific point of view is really give a second life to all the plastics, and we want to upcycle the plastic, means that the value, economical value of the product that we are going to make from our waste plastic is going to be more valuable than the plastic itself.
How do you do that? How do you give an economic incentive to recycle something like a plastic bottle or any other plastic product to make it actually more valuable?
Yeah, the first big step is really the mechanical recycle. We need to be able to separate all the different kinds of plastics and have them in a single feed. And then when we have a single feed, for example, polypropylene, pure polyethylene, we have, and we are developing at Argonne and also all over the country, particularly in the US, new technology and new processes to transform, for example, a plastic bottle in a shampoo or a plastic bottle in a motor oil that you can use in your car.
Very interesting. And Jeff Spangenberger, let's bring you in here. So you're studying ways to recycle lithium-ion batteries, which is really important now because of the fact that they're used in cell phones and electric vehicles. First of all, tell us the demand right now for lithium-ion batteries.
Well, the demand has been pretty constant for consumer electronic battery uses, cell phones and laptops. But they're really going to start to skyrocket pretty soon for electric vehicles. They just came out about 10 years ago, lithium-ion battery technology in our electric vehicles. And they're in about, I would say, at end of life right now. They're going to reach end of life in the next 3 or 4 years, we'll say. So from this point on, we're going to skyrocket to about 7 to 10 times that is estimated in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
And so how difficult is it to recycle lithium-ion batteries then? And how important is it to do that given what you're mentioning here?
Well, those are two great questions. It's definitely important to recycle. We need to recover the materials that we get because we really do dig into these materials in the world in order to make these predicted amounts of batteries. But fortunately, we can recycle them now, and there's really good ways to recycle them. What we're working at Argonne and around the National Lab System is to try and improve the battery recycling capabilities to improve anywhere we can, mainly the economics, in order to help really drive this so that people want to recycle the batteries.
All right, Massimiliano, I'll come back to you here. There's a recent report from a group called Beyond Plastics that estimates the plastics industry will surpass coal as a source of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So it's not just bad for landfills and the environment that way, but the production of plastics is also bad in terms of fossil fuel emission. So what does that portend for plastic use going forward?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, the plastic accumulation problem is really three problems. It's a behavioral problem. We need to educate the population of how to do an efficient recycling at home. So far, we have only one blue bin where we put everything inside. It's an economical problem, as Jeff was pointed out, for a battery, but also is a problem also for plastics, because the cost of plastics right now is almost zero. It's so cheap to make plastic that there is no any incentive to do plastic recycling. And the third problem is a scientific problem that we spent 9,500 years to make new plastics they are very light, are very performing materials, but only few in the past 5 years we really started to look at how we can transform these plastics to give this plastic a second life or give them a second economical value.
And Jeff Spangenberger, you know, in terms of electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries, it sounds environmentally friendly, but as I understand, mining for lithium is really rough on the environment. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say really rough on the environment. I'd say that there are definitely environmental impacts associated with that. But you really need to look at the big picture. There's, I say LCA very easily, but it's life cycle analysis. And so there are impacts to manufacturing a battery, and they are greater than the impacts associated with manufacturing an internal combustion engine. But you have to look at the entire life cycle of a product. And so through the life cycle of an EV, the use phase emits a lot less emissions. And then there's the recycling portion of it. So you have to really look at the entire life cycle of a product.
So certainly a win environmentally when put into context like that. And Jeff, how do you make it affordable or economically efficient to recycle lithium-ion batteries to help solve this problem?
Yeah, boy, I wish I could go into details. We get really excited about the work we do at Argonne. But to keep it simple, the idea is to increase the revenue products from what you're recycling and reduce the costs to process that material. And that's what we're really doing with some really cool technologies.
You know, Massimiliano, we mentioned that in Chicago, the blue bin recycling hasn't really worked very well. No recycling effort has really worked well here in Chicago. How do residents need to start changing their behavior to find a system here that works?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of opportunities. One solution is not a single solution. We really need multiple options. One of that could be really try to educate the population of separate the metal from glass, from paper, from plastics, have multiple bins, for example, because that is going to also to help the waste collector to really separate this waste in a more efficient way. And also we really need to invest in our material recycling facilities, for example, using artificial intelligence or robotic system to increase the efficiency of separations.
All right, well, a lot of important research that you're doing over there at Argonne, and we thank you for sharing some of that with us. Our thanks to Max Del Ferro and Jeff Spangberger. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Since it was founded back in 1956, the Chicago Children's Choir has grown from a single choir to a vast network of singers across the city. Its latest recording sings with the resilience of young people working together to raise each other's voices. Our Mark Vitale recently brought us this story. Here's another look.
Oh, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on.
From Hyde Park to Humboldt Park, the Chicago Children's Choir is everywhere, with some young folks still learning about music and others on a career path.
Don't stop this train.
Now the choir has joined forces with the Q Brothers for the new record, Long Way Home, a musical odyssey and love letter to the city.
We collaborate with so many great artists and cultural institutions in our city, nation, and the world. With the Q Brothers, this was a really special, unique opportunity to create with them, with the singers. So they came in from the beginning to workshop several scenes.
That's because the album began as a stage show pre-pandemic.
Well, now it's time to settle the score. Hey!
In the theater, the Q Brothers have a reputation for rap adaptations of Shakespeare and more.
We've always written for ourselves to perform in, and we've always done the bare minimum of casting. So 4 of us play 20-some characters. This is the first time somebody said, we have 100 people for you to cast in this and 100 voices to use that all know how to sing and can sing in 8-part harmonies. Like, what a dream.
The Chicago Children's Choir was born out of the Civil Rights Movement in 1956. We've impacted over 50,000 young people. What started out as one choir in Hyde Park is now a network of over 100. We have partnerships with Chicago Public Schools. We have after-school satellites throughout the city.
One former choir student is the singer Kia, who we spoke with before her performance at the Pitchfork Music Festival.
It taught me a lot about what it meant to just be exposed to music and like having to sing, but like be in tune with your neighbors and sing the harmony parts. But I also think it taught me a lot about what it means to be like a working musician. I'm really grateful for that because I feel like it really seasoned me for now.
Once in a while when it's good, it'll feel like it should.
They are all learning how to become not only musicians but global ambassadors, leaders, ambassadors of their neighborhood. That's the power of music, to unify all of us, right? Despite our differences, religious, sexual orientation, or otherwise, like socioeconomic, that music is this force that brings us all together and connects and unites us and helps us celebrate our shared humanity.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The new record, The Long Way Home, is out now. The Chicago Children's Choir is currently preparing for their winter concerts in early December. And this Wednesday, there is an open rehearsal with their Austin Neighborhood Choir. You can find out more on our website. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. COP26 comes to a close. What's next for world leaders and scientists on the climate change front?
And we step inside Chicago's first NFT gallery, which sells art in person as well as on the metaverse, which I'm still not sure what it is. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
I think we're in the real universe and not the metaverse right now, so that's all I know. And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.